Welcome to B'madzaje Ganonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinabek Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinabek Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. This November marks the 10th year that Treaties Recognition Week will be observed in Ontario. Held in the first week of November, Treaties Recognition Week is a time to honor the importance of treaties and help Ontario students and residents understand the significance of treaty rights, relationships and obligations, and their relevance today. The Anishinabek Nation is committed to supporting a clear and responsible understanding of the treaty relationship and has been a leader in developing resources to support public education. We promote Treaties Recognition Week annually through our social media channels, the Anishinabek News, and this podcast. The Anishinabek Nation Communications Department has also created treaty education materials for people of all ages, from preschool to university level. Teachers can order classroom materials connected to the Ontario curriculum and subject areas, including books in English, French, and Anishinaabe, as well as puzzles. The storybooks Alex Shares His Wampum Belt and Dakota Talks About Treaties continue to be popular. Our websites, such as the Ejinawending How We Are Related site for elementary school learners, and the Gado Sastamo Ki Me, this is our understanding site for secondary school students, offer interactive experiences as well as detailed lesson plans for educators. Our newest educational resource is a book called This Is My Treaty that shares the foundational elements of treaty relationships for children ages 3 to 6. This Is My Treaty was written by Educator Kelly Crawford and Anishinabek Nation Communications Director Marci Becking, with photography by Sarah Cornthwaite of Nipissing First Nation and Charles Fiado. Kelly Crawford and Marci Becking designed the book to engage preschool and kindergarten-age children with treaty concepts that are related to their curriculum, such as sharing and the meaning of promises. The photos were specifically selected to encourage students to understand that we all have responsibilities in the treaty relationship. To learn more about this new resource, I spoke with treaty educator Kelly Crawford. Kelly Crawford is a proud citizen of Chaging First Nation. She has a background in education and is currently a PhD candidate at Laurentian University. Kelly has held leadership positions in Indigenous education, including the Kinomadzuin Education Body, the Kenjigawinteg Educational Institute, and the University of Toronto Scarborough. She is an expert in treaty education and has authored several books and curricular resources on treaties in Ontario in collaboration with the Anishinabek Nation. Kelly delivers guest lectures and treaty education sessions across the province for educational institutes and government organizations, and continues to contribute to various curriculum projects across Ontario. Kelly and I spoke about how she got into treaty education, how Indigenous history and treaties were not included in the curriculum, and how the Anishinabek Nation's education resources are helping to fill the gaps, and why it's important that all Ontario students and citizens have opportunities to learn about treaties and their relevance to our shared relationships and responsibilities today. Hi, Kelly Crawford. Miigwech for joining us here on B'madzaje Ganonindwa. Welcome.
Oh, miigwech, Ani Lisa.
So, Kelly, we're here today to talk about your new treaty education resource book, This Is My Treaty. But before we get into talking about the book, would you like to tell us about yourself and your work?
Miigwech Lisa, B'malshe Megazai Kwe Indigenous College, Wabijeshik Dodam Chiging Donji. My name is Kelly Crawford. I'm from Chiging First Nation, and I'm happy to be here with you on the program to share this new book that is geared towards our little ones for preschool and kindergarten. A bit about myself. I've been in education for a couple of years, specifically in Indigenous education. I've been in both educator roles and administrative roles from kindergarten to university over the past few years in both Indigenous systems and non-Indigenous systems. I'm the mother of two daughters. So that was, part of my path in having many hats to wear throughout the years. I do support a lot of curriculum development work. And of course, this treaty learning journey that has taken place since, I believe, 2012, I think is when we started on this path. So I do that currently. I'm teaching for TMU, formerly Ryerson University, and also Centennial College, and supporting some curriculum and TRC related projects with different organizations in Ontario.
You're very busy. It looks like you're doing a lot of different projects. You mentioned this treaty education piece, TRC related, and with a different number of groups, adults, students, the general public as well. How did you get into treaty education as a specific topic?
It's kind of a funny story because, as far as my education, I actually went to college first and took television broadcasting and interactive multimedia and business management, human resources, and then went back to school for my undergrad in Native Studies, which will date that because it's no longer called Native Studies, and then continued on and took my Bachelor of Education, followed by my Master's in Integrated Studies in Cultural Studies and Education Studies, and then had taught and had a couple different positions. And it's a kind of actually related to a job that I had that wasn't a teaching job. I was actually working for the Union of Ontario Indians, or Anishinabek Nation, supporting governance and education negotiations, actually. And it just so happened that at that time, Morris Switzer, who is definitely a mentor of mine, had written a book. And the feedback from the book with teachers was lots of solid content in there, but how do we actually use it in the classroom? And it was one of those things where, oh, Kelly's a teacher, isn't she? And I was asked to write a lesson plan. That's where this whole thing started for me. It was like, do you think tonight you could just write us one lesson plan just to see what that would look like? And it started with one lesson plan, and then it expanded to a few lesson plans, and then it was expanded into a kit, the physical We're All Treaty People kit, which I'm sure you're well aware of, with the Lego wampum belt inside of that. And then from that, it began with doing sessions in schools, specifically for that kit with students and teachers as well as administrators and some areas of the provincial government. So that's kind of where it started. Then it ended up that every year there was something, that we were doing for Treaty Week.
Interesting. So you started with one lesson plan, actually developed over time into, more lesson plans, a kit, curriculum development, presentations, schools, the province. It's amazing how you're saying this one little lesson plan.
Yeah, it was one lesson plan one night, and then it was, let's do a kit. And then from that kit and traveling, and we actually should have kept track of the different schools, because it would be individual, it might be school based or just a classroom based. And it was a lot of different presentations and different locations around Ontario, and not just within Treaty Week, but just throughout the year for whatever schedules would allow. Then from that, it turned into, because that kit was specifically for up to grade 8. So then it was, okay, what can we do for 9 and up? So that's where the secondary kit came in. a Godot System Akime. So created that kit for high school. Then it became a conversation about children's books, basically. And that's where the Alex and Dakota book came from. And that really just tells their story, because Alex, who created the Lego wampum belt, he would come to sessions with me as well. And Dakota, my daughter, would also come to sessions. So Alex is about the Lego wampum belt, and Dakota was about her with the celebration of Treaty in Niagara. So that was also interesting too, because, you know, in that 250th celebration, there were 3 kids and 2 of them were mine. So, I mean, it's their story, really. So that's where that piece came from. And then we went into what we did was we took the We Are All Treaty People physical kit and made it into a virtual world with avatars and videos. Then the next adventure was taking the Godot System Okime high school kit and making that virtual as well. Yeah, and then here we are, because then the additional feedback was, what can we do for ECE, for early childhood education, preschool, kindergarten, that type of thing. And that's where the idea for this book came from.
Okay, so it's really evolved. And that's interesting. You're saying too that while you're developing these treaty education materials, you've had the feedback and experiences or thoughts of young people were really part of this process of developing these materials.
Yes, and I think that that's a really important piece. And even when you're looking at doing different sessions with students of various ages and even teachers, because when you look at it, some people might think, oh, well, the Lego would be more suited for a younger audience. That's not necessarily true, and not necessarily true with the content, because the reality is treaty education wasn't taught. So even with the teachers' guides and their development, because they all have teachers' guides that were developed as well, even with that, a lot of the direction from that came from observations from sessions with teachers. And that the idea of, okay, I have to come in and teach this, but I was never taught it. And there's a real fear in that. So I see my role more as a support for them to say, it's okay for you to say, we're going to learn this together, because it was very purposeful why it wasn't taught, right? So it's on different levels, whether it's students or teachers, and how you support that. But there's always that. I want to say there's feedback, but it's also observation in their learning, going through the lessons with them. So it's more of like, the sessions are much more, I would say, interactive. It's not, here's a teacher's guide, here's the lesson plans, go for it. No, that's not how the delivery is done. It's interactive, and they actually participate in those, because the best way to be able to teach something is for you to actually experience it yourself. And so you can understand what students would potentially might be feeling, or what they, how they would look at it. So that's a part of the approach with the professional development or sessions.
That does sound like a very Anishinaabe way of doing things, right? Making sure that you're not only mentally learning the material, but physically learning and learning through experience. I'm intrigued, though, you mentioned this idea of this fear that existed of doing treaty education, because you mentioned that for whatever certain reasons that this treaty education was not included in the classroom. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, when we look at, and it's not even so much just the treaty education, when you look at the history of Indigenous people in this country, and I mean, of course, we're located in Ontario. So when you look at that, as far as the curriculum that has been delivered over the years, a lot of these pieces were deliberately not included. So those, you're seeing stories now. You're seeing real stories, right? So think about it this way, even with, let's take residential school, for example. How many people you hear them when they are learning about that, like, I didn't even know this was happening, right? But now when you look at the current climate and education. That is part of the curriculum. So before, not only was it not taught, it wasn't even believed that it was even happening, right? So when you look at treaty education, and I often say this, the average person in Ontario, I would hope, that the average person in Ontario can tell you what city or town they're from, what province they live in. Can they tell you the traditional territory they live on and what treaty area they're in? Right? And I question that. And I often, even as an example, actually both the kids have a treaty map of Ontario. And this map, been using it for quite some time, but when you put it up on a wall, and this is not a criticism of everyone, this is just the reality. So when you say, okay, and this is like right in the beginning, so can you tell me what the treaty areas are in Ontario? And oftentimes people will point, so when you look at the map, where all the reserves are, so all the First Nation communities, and that's what people believe. So people don't understand that if you're in the province of Ontario, you are in treaty land and you have a responsibility in that. And it's important to understand that history of that and understand what we're all treaty people means.
That's true. I guess I can relate to that because I know that when I was growing up, I certainly did not learn what treaty area I was in. And even going back to when I was young, maps of Ontario didn't even include the reserves. Even now, you might be driving down a highway and the signs on the road will not tell you that there's a reserve in 10 kilometers ahead. So yeah, there has been this, you might say, like a deliberate erasure of, this very important presence of Indigenous people on the land and our treaty relationships on the land that really are the foundation of the settlement of the provinces and the country. Okay, so that's neat, though. You're saying we are integrating treaty education, and it's a part of learning history and people learning their responsibility as treaty people. So why do you think it's important then that treaty education be included in all Ontario classrooms?
I think it's important to be included in all Ontario classrooms because it's not something of the past. These exist. There's no expiration date. And the reality is, if you're in Ontario, you're on treaty land. So you should be given the opportunity to learn about this. And also, I mean, there's definitely those facts that, that the treaties still exist and that you're on treaty land. The other part is, for me, it's about supporting a relationship that has been, I'm going to say, basically devastated by race-based legislation and as far as land. Everything's about land. So let's really understand what that relationship looks like. Not only for land, like occupying land or possession of land, but also responsibility to take care of the land is an important piece that both, if you will, parties have a responsibility for, right? And the other part too, and when you were saying about maps, for example, when you really look at it, there's varying maps. Like borders are different, right? We have communities that go into different areas of these maps that were created, I guess you could say, upon settlement or thereafter. So I think it's important for people to understand that whole history and understand how does that affect me? Because oftentimes it is people, it's a thing of the past. It's a thing of the past. And I can remember, there's been so many sessions, but I remember, look, with students, what they need to understand how that would feel in their today context if that happened to them as far as the treaty piece. So that's kind of part of how I walk it through. So I walk it through with them in their current even world, right? So it's literally like, so one class, this group was pretty funny because I was like, okay, talk to them about, what does an agreement mean? And, that type of thing. And then I said, okay, pick your favorite space in school. Most times there's outside the gym or, something like that. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to give you whatever you want. Your group of 5, you guys pick whatever you want, and I'm going to give it to you. And so they would, in their context, right, they would be like PlayStation or, money or, those types of things. And I'd be like, perfect, great, no problem. It's yours. And I said, I just want to be able to, but I can use like some of your space, right? Like sometimes I can be in part of your space. Oh yeah, you can come over and use our gym if you're gonna, yada yada. And then I flip it and I say, actually, I'm just gonna take the whole thing. I'm just gonna take the whole thing. And I'm just not gonna give you that stuff. And they're like, you can't do that. Da, 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 da. They get all upset. And I'm like, well, why can't I do it? I said, I think I'm just going to pass a law that says I can do whatever I want. Right. So it's the different, like, understanding that. And instead of, and there's obviously the other piece. And obviously that's an analogy, but they need to feel that to then feel a need to learn it instead of me saying the Indian Act in 1876, like that sort of delivery, because then they'll want to know more about it. Because, well, that didn't make me feel so good. Or the analogy of, and I've used this many times in one of our videos, one of our avatars also explains it as well. But the quick part about it is, okay, I'll say in the session, I'm 5 hours away from home. Do you think, I'm kind of tired. Do you think I can come over for dinner? And, I always hope someone's got to say yes. And usually someone does. And I'll say, okay, that's great. And so then I go to their house for dinner. And of course, this is the quick version, but then they make great dinner. It's so comfortable. And I'm like really tired. Do you think I could sleep on your couch? No problem. No problem. Yeah, you can sleep on the couch. So I sleep on the couch. And then I wake up the next morning and, they make me breakfast. It's fantastic. Very hospitable. I really don't want to drive. Do you think maybe I could stay another night? Right. And so then I work myself from the couch into their spare room. Right. And then I'm still there and I talk about how accommodating they are and how we're getting along and, and then I bring it to the point where in their backyard, they have a fenced in little section. And by the end, they're in that section. I've taken over their entire house and I get to tell them when they get to come out of that and when they can't. That's the reality of what's happened in this country. We just don't want to say it that way. So it's really important. It's a really important piece of history for people to understand. Not even just history, it's current. I shouldn't even use the word history. I don't want to get into that. But it's that piece, and it's still an existing relationship that needs to be taken care of and respected.
Wow. So that's really a way of making it real for people. I can imagine how when you're having these discussions with students, I think young people have an innate sense of justice. They have an innate sense of what is right. I like how when you explain it this way that I guess they're motivated by knowing what is right and having the sense of justice to want to learn more about this further.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that because the first group I ever did was just with those lesson plans and the book. And it was actually a school in North Bay, and it was grade 5, 6 or 5, 6, 7. Anyhow, and I brought them all outside because that's the other thing. There's a bunch of different parts, right? Like they need to be able to connect to the land. Even though it's a schoolyard, it's still outdoors. And kind of when you go through that, then they have this, I want to learn more, right? So then just even going through a chunked way, I guess you could say, through the We Are All Treaty People book. And there was this one grade 5 student. He was so upset. He was so upset that this has happened and he knew nothing about it. And I always think about him. I always remember him, that it's important. That's why this work's important. Because he was so angry. And like, he was like, I can't believe this is,
But we do have to redirect our feelings because I know as an Indigenous person, when I first started to learn the things that we hadn't been taught at school, same thing. I had this experience in university. I was just blown away. But we do have to figure out what to do with those feelings. We have to be assisted or be redirected into what is a good direction forward once we have this knowledge.
Exactly. And I think that's the action piece. That's looking at it. And that's why I think with the treaty education piece, like you're learning a piece, but then there's also like a creative or a physical or, like some kind of like a production of something. And then the conversation is, what is your role? Like, what is your role in this? What is your role in this story? And that's the important piece, right? So all the sessions actually do end with an activity like that really gets people to think about, how can I contribute and how are we now like a learning community in relation to these pieces, and what is my part? Not in the sense of, okay, you're going to carry everything on your shoulders. That's not the intent. The intent is, what could my little part be, right?
Okay, good. So I like how you're saying there's a community to it. Sometimes we feel that, what can one person do? But you're saying if you're connected to a community, then we have the collective action, and then it's something that we can continue going forward in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an important part of that learning process, I believe.
Are teachers today learning more within their teacher education about Indigenous culture, Indigenous history, treaties, that kind of thing?
I would say yes. And I think it depends on when you compare it to, really, as far as what they're learning. There's certainly different additional qualification courses. There's certainly professional development opportunities for teachers. So I do think there are more opportunities, and that is happening a lot more. But I mean, you're also seeing boards that have made commitments to the TRC. So there's that piece, right, which was a little bit different from before within a program. So hopeful that those pieces will continue to grow.
Yeah, very hopeful for sure. So let's talk about the new treaty education resource. It's called This Is My Treaty. I'm looking at the description on goodminds.com. This Is My Treaty, a book that shares the foundational elements of treaty relationships for ages 3 to 6. Learning about the treaty relationship can begin at an incredibly early age. So tell us about the book. What are the contents of this book, and how did you choose to explain treaty concepts to such a young age group?
Well, I think that it really started with wanting to create something for that age. And then when you look at what a treaty, and of course, we can say this is an agreement, this is a legal document, that, and it's really about, when you look at those, for this idea anyways, was more about looking at, what is a promise, right? What does responsibility look like? And getting students to see themselves within, I guess you could say that was specifically why some of the pictures were chosen. It's to kind of, portray that the pictures, like, they vary with different areas, I guess. So there's this understanding that, a city is part of a treaty. Okay, like, this is just by looking at a picture. So there's several sight words that are in the book. The word promise. So those concepts are really about the intent of treaties, right? We promise to share the land. We promise to to get along with others. We promise to, like, those fundamental pieces. And when you look at it, for example, just as one example, the word promise is in the Ontario curriculum. That concept for that is in there. And students at that age can understand what a promise is, right? We're not suggesting that your 3 to 6-year-old is going to know everything about treaties. No, this is really about starting the fundamentals of understanding responsibility, promise, taking care of land, taking care of animals, and taking care of each other. And then as they get older, then those other resources expand on that, on those concepts. It just so happens we did it the other way around. But that's really the intent of the book. And it's really like those elements for students, they can understand that. There is repetition in the book. So this is our treaty, for example, uses the word this instead of that to show that a treaty is close to the individual and not something of the past or distant, reinforcing that treaties are living documents and not a thing of the past. And then with the book as well, because this is the other piece too, for the teachers, there is a couple, like a little paragraph just on some educator support pieces. But my recommendation, although we have that, it's a very small, easy read book, obviously. So it does give like a couple little key pieces about treaties, because the reality is too, some teachers that maybe get this book or want to use this book in their classroom might not have any idea about treaties, and that's okay. So it gives like a couple little points, but the recommendation that I would certainly give for their own learning would be for them to use the online resources, just to sort of have that knowledge so that they understand that within this is those fundamental elements, just so it doesn't, cause them confusion either, right? So that support is there as well, and it's available online and it's free, right? So
it's definitely age appropriate to what children at that age group are learning about. They're learning about their good relationships and behavior with their peers or with their family or with their community. They're just starting to learn that. So would you say then, was there a gap in that group for age appropriate resources before you and Marci decided to create a resource for, preschool and kindergarten?
Yes, like as far as I'm aware, yes. And I think there's a lot of gaps in resources that need to be developed. And the thinking was, even with this book, around even the actual physical book, it's meant to be able to be wiped down, right? Because you're in like with the little ones, and so that was kind of where the sort of ideas of what that could look like. And I think something like this with those concepts in relation to treaty for that age, I think there's a gap. I don't think that that's something that's really discussed, because we often in education, it's really interesting because it's okay. So the curriculum with this grade is this, and then the next year it's this. But the reality is, and that's kind of when you look at even the first kit, it wasn't that grade 1, 2, 3, 4, any of it really had curriculum expectations around treaties. It was that, okay, we want to teach about treaties. How can it be connected to the curriculum? So that's how I develop resources. I look at it from that lens because it can be connected. So that's why both kits, the elementary and secondary, they're tied to the curriculum expectations. But however, it could be music, it could be language arts, it could be all of those different subject areas. Not necessarily, this is just specifically for this course. So I think that same concept is applied in this book. It doesn't say, in kindergarten curriculum, for example, you're going to learn about treaties like that. That's not part of it, right? But this fundamental piece that's attached to it, that is part of the curriculum. So that's a way to make, from my view, make the understanding of the treaty relationship go throughout life, as opposed to I learn about treaties in, whatever grade. And then it becomes on this date, and, the intent is not, when you look in Ontario, 46 treaties, the intent isn't for everyone to be able to recite every treaty. It's to understand what it is and that relationship piece. Because like under the umbrella of Indigenous education, for example, and certainly treaty education, all of these pieces that were taken out and not shared and not in the education system, when you look at the history of Indigenous people in this country, and then you look at settlement and you just look at the years and what has happened and how far we've come, we also are playing catch up like 5 times fast, right? So we need to really look at that. And I don't think that even from an Indigenous lens, or how I would look at an Anishinaabe pedagogical approach or an Indigenous pedagogical approach, I wouldn't say that it would be, oh no, you're just going to learn that in this age. We have to be learning it all the way through. So what does that look like, and how do we do that?
So you wrote the teacher's guides for We Are Treaty People, Gado Sastamokime, Ejinaweding. I hope I pronounced those correctly. But can you tell me a little about what's in the teacher's guides and some of the feedback you've received in the last decade from educators on these resources?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So the teacher's guide, like they include the lesson plans, teacher support, information on treaties, some like tips and tricks. Basically, each of the guides show the curriculum connections, all of those pieces to support them in the classroom with that work. The feedback, I think, has been pretty positive, actually, which has been interesting. I've had some people that have come to a session, but then come to more than one session, which is good. But the feedback, and I know, the Anishinabek Nation has been sent different things. Like some of the activities, like classrooms will create things and they'll share, a thank you, and you get like, all the pictures and, what the students created. So to me, that's like a positive feedback because it's being used, right? So I think the feedback is pretty good. Like we're still getting requests for sessions with the different pieces, even though, the kits they're online now. So it's kind of a little bit of a different request, but for the most part, positive feedback. And I know when teachers write in specifically, well, to Marci at the Anishinabek Nation, she'll share those pieces.
So good to know that these materials are being well used in classrooms. I'm wondering, I guess we kind of did talk already about the other 2 books you wrote in 2017. Alex Harris's Wampum Belt and Dakota talks about treaties. I hear they're still very popular with grade 1 to 4 teachers. Why do you think these are important narratives to tell?
I think it's important because it shows some of those concepts. Like Alex is about the promise and about the Lego Wampum Belt, because it really is his story, right? And I think when students realize that, oh, that's a person, and that's a story, and he really did that type of thing, I think that's meaningful. And the content as well, because there's, with Dakota's book, even with that experience, like that's someone going on vacation and going to the celebration of the Treaty of Niagara. So yes, we can talk about the Treaty of Niagara. Like, so when I think about that, I often say this. So we're talking about something that fundamentally allowed for peaceful settlement of this country. And everyone knows what Canada Day is, for the most part, right? We celebrate Canada Day, all of this. So 250th celebration of the Treaty of Niagara. And like, as I mentioned before, right? 55 people were there. So we have some work to do.
And that was a very important treaty. Yeah, lots of work to do there. So Ontario Treaties Recognition Week, that happens every year now, the first week of November. It's a very important event in Ontario. So tell me, why do you feel like this Treaties Recognition Week is very important for students and for the general public?
Oh, I think it's important that the teaching and learning of treaties happens throughout the year, but it's also, I think it's important that, in that creation of that week, that it really does put a spotlight on that. And I think even with that, in a lot of, in this treaty work, it was also the Anishinabek Nation and with the support of the province of Ontario. And then that's a relationship. And typically the opening of Treaty Week would be with representatives from both sides of that relationship and with students and of sharing of that day. And now that that's been taking place, it is well known. So a lot of organizations educate, like schools, it's like, okay, what are we doing for Treaty Week? What are we going to do for Treaty Week? So that's good. So it's becoming part of that narrative as opposed to what's a treaty? So it's important because it gives that exposure and it creates more of a drive for learning, not only just in education settings, but in every setting. So that will help individuals to really understand the relationship that exists between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people and between treaty partners.
Well, Kelly Miigwech, I'm saying miigwech to you from Treaty of 1850 Robinson Huron area. So from this treaty area to your treaty area, miigwech for joining us today on B'madzaje Ginonindwa. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Lisa. Bamampi.
Chimigwech to our guest, Kelly Crawford, and to Marci Becking of the Anishinabek Nation Communications Department for supporting this episode. This Is My Treaty is available in Anishinaabemowin, English, and French. To get your copy, send a message to orders@anishinabek.ca or visit goodminds.com. To learn more about Treaties Recognition Week and the treaty education resources created by the Anishinabek Nation, find the links in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Minopamatsawin by Nigel Irwin and Chippewa Travelers, and Old Friends Coming Around by Justin Delorme, licensed by Nagamo Publishing. Chimigwech for listening to B'madzaje Ginonindwa. Until next time, Bama Pi.